This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the town of North Haven.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the February 15th meeting of the Board of Finance for the town of North Haven. Before we get into tonight's agenda, I do just want to say one or two things. I think most everyone in this room is aware that one of our longtime members, Jim Leonis, passed away, and the services were today. Many of you were there. I was there. I want to say on behalf of the board how much we'll miss Jim, how dedicated he was over the years, and how I think we all always valued his advice and his life stories and his hard work. As many of you know, Mike was exceptionally close to Jim, and I'd like to just give him a minute, if we could, please, to say a few things about Jim.
Well, thank you, Tim. So it was a very emotional day today. I delivered the eulogy. I kept my remarks during the eulogy more on a personal note, but I want everyone here to know that on a professional note, Jim really loved being part of this Board of Finance. He enjoyed each and every person he came in contact with, everybody on this board. He enjoyed the friendships that he had made down through the years with members on this board and with people in the town government. I presented his wife after the ceremony at the cemetery today, his nameplate, because he was very proud of that. And I gave that to the family today at the after family event that I was at. So he was a great man, loved what he did here, loved serving the town, and really enjoyed working with each and every one of you. So thank you for your support and friendship to Jim down through the years. Thank you, Tim.
Great. Thank you, Mike. So if we could, please, I'd just like to observe a moment of silence in Jim's honor before we begin, please. Thank you so much. One more thing before we start. We do have a workshop here at 7 o'clock. We already have some other board members in attendance, along with some town employees who will be presenting. We do have largely just our normal reports, but also the MOU, which is here on the agenda. So if we could, please, I'd like to try and keep this to half an hour, just sort of stay with the agenda for the workshop, which is at 7. So with that, open the meeting. We do have our minutes from the December 21st meeting. All right, any questions, comments?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll take a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, the second item on the agenda is the memorandum of agreement, between the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed. We've talked about this several times. You do have a draft copy. I will point out a couple things on it, but it's not a draft copy. It is the agreement, in front of us. It has been not accepted by the Board of Ed, but it has been blessed by Howard Wardlow, Patrick Sturck, and they have been, of course, in contact with members of the Board of Ed to get their feedback. So it is here in front of us. I will just mention a couple things based on conversations we've had here in this room in the past. So, for instance, towards the bottom of the page under the small letter B, you'll notice there is a sentence there that talks about a non-binding good faith description of the proposed use of unexpended funds, which was a request of one of our members. You'll also notice that starting at the bottom of the page, it specifically says that the Board of Ed, this was at their request, by the way, will remain the oversight body responsible for how the appropriated funds are ultimately spent. And Nancy, I know you asked that we put in a line here that just after that, which is on the top of the next page, which says that any unexpended funds not approved by the Board of Finance, shall be deposited into the town's general fund. So with that, why don't we do this? We do have a motion before us, so what I'd like to do is open it for discussion, and then it is our intention to vote on this evening. So, any comments, questions on the MOA? Sorry, I always say MOU.
If no one else has any questions or comments, I'd just like to make just one kind of just housekeeping point out that you've actually already made the point, which is this a memorandum of agreement or a memorandum of understanding? I really have no preference one way or the other, but I think for consistency purposes, we really should use that exact same terminology throughout this document. As you can see in the title, it says memorandum of agreement, but then down in the last paragraph of the first page, it refers to MOU without
Right.
any definition of what that is.
Yeah.
And then on the second page, it once again refers to a memorandum of agreement. So
Yep.
I think we should just pick one and
Right.
just go with that.
I think that's a good point. It is titled memorandum of agreement. I'm sure that we can make that change.
So let's just call it an MOA then, and have that defined perhaps in that for purposes of this memorandum of agreement, and in parentheses, MOU, and then just go from there. Is that, everyone okay with that?
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
that's a
Perfect.
that's a good comment.
Okay. In terms of the actual content of this document, I have no problems with it as it's written. I think the changes that have been made are pretty substantial improvements. I just wanted to kind of run some general philosophical issues by this board. Again, at one of the point, it refers to the purpose and intent of Fund 373. And I guess the question is, if the intent of this fourth BOE reserve fund, which is on the town's, proposed to be on the town's ledger, we already have special ed, capital improvement, and medical and dental. So this would be the fourth one.
Well, it'd be third. If you might recall, I had a note in this, in a prior draft, but I believe what I think I said was that they're going to collapse the capital fund into this because there's no point in trying to distinguish between the two. So that fund will be collapsed into this one.
Oh, that I didn't know at all.
We talked about that at another
Okay.
meeting, I think, Nancy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Collapsed. Okay, so all the more reason, then I think it's critically important that we have this conversation. So if the intent is to have a rainy day fund, and I'm using this very generically to refer to special ed, medical and dental, and now this third category of this carryover fund, or 373. If we're calling a rainy day fund for either expenses that have popped up out of nowhere that the Board of Ed couldn't anticipate, that's one type of rainy day usage. Another type is for budgeted line items that for whatever reason have just ballooned beyond the budgeted amount. They could use this fund in order to cover that. The second potential intended use, which is very different and no nefarious implications at all, is if they want to use this as a means for funding known expenses that they're choosing to carve out of the budget, such as capital expenses. As the chairman pointed out, every other department has a capital budget request except Board of Ed. They have a 5-year plan, but their 1-year capital requests are not included as part of their total budget requests. So if they're trying to use this extra budgetary reserve fund specifically to pay for those things that they know that they have to buy, as opposed to things that you can't anticipate, then I think that intent is very different. And so in those two different scenarios, if it's to be used as a rainy day fund, I would like to just request that the budgeted line items should be expended before they turn to using these reserves. So for example, they have a line in their budget that is called legal fees, and it's broken up into special ed legal fees and non-special ed legal fees. However, there have been withdrawals from the Special Ed Reserve Fund starting the very first month of this fiscal year. So they couldn't have already expended that particular line item in the first month, and there were 4 total this year. So my request is that they just simply utilize a budgeted line item first before going to the reserves. And if there are unbudgeted expenses, that they please try to utilize their monthly transfers. On the town side, we have to wait till the end of the fiscal year to do transfers. The Board of Education is able to do transfers each and every month. So for example, paying for the bleachers that had to be rented because they're renovating Vandercore Field. That was an extra $28,000 that they hadn't anticipated for the current fiscal year, but they were able to use various types of other under-expended line items in order to cover that. So if the rainy day fund usage is the intent, I'd like to make those 2 requests. If it is in fact the second intended usage, which is to have a means for funding known expenses that are deliberately excluded from the budget, then I think we just need to be aware that a comparison of BOE budgets from year to year to year is no longer going to be an apples to apples comparison, because they will have at their disposal not only the BOE budget from the taxpayers of North Haven, but they also will have $6 million in outside grants, plus these 3 reserve accounts in order to pay for all of the various expenses. And the reason that this is a little bit more complicated is that some of their outside grants can be utilized for budgeted operating expenses. So that's where this commingling of budgeted funds and outside grants gets a little bit murky. And so if they use an outside grant, say, to pay for a budgeted line item, that frees up some of that money, and they can use it any way they want, and that's according to statute. But we just need to be aware that that is exactly what we're blessing here, if in fact that is the intent. So I just wanted to call this to everyone's attention.
Truth be told, Nancy, and my sense is that if I had to go to the BOE right now and tell them that you want to put in those 2 caveats you start with, this is a non-starter. Look, we've established this MOU, MOA, whatever, okay, and they have to come before us and ask that we put money aside in it. And that's the time to ask perhaps some of the questions you're asking. I don't think they're going to want us to get into the weeds with them and start telling them that they can't use this money until they expend money here on this line item there. And by the way, I don't want to get involved with that. That's not my business. Okay, my business is the town side for the most part, except to approve the budget, which we're in the process of, as you know, right now. Okay, it's not to tell the Board of Ed how to spend their money. That's their job.
Yeah, again, I'm not trying to tell the Board of Ed how to spend
I
their
bet
money.
that's going to be their viewpoint.
But if they are trying to circumvent our budgetary process by the use of these reserve funds, again, that's the
I'm not so
name.
sure, by the way, that in previous years their capital wasn't in the budget. I caught the same thing you did, that it's not in this year's budget proposal they put before us, and maybe it's because they had the CapEx fund to use it last year. I'd have to go back, if I even have the records, to see what we did 10 years ago.
So
But
maybe perhaps
But be that as it may,
some of the other more seasoned members of this Board of Finance or Mr. Frieda can address this.
It
How
doesn't have-
did
it
they
doesn't-
pay for capital expenditures in the past, before we created this?
that's not what we're talking about right now. All we're talking about is giving them the ability to come before this board and put aside money for a use that they at least have to say what they're going to do with it, for which the Board of Ed will eventually bless the specific use. And that's it. Whether they use it for capital or operating expense, that's, I guess, going to be up to us to not decide, because we don't have that right, but at least to vet, if you will, at the time that they come before us.
Yeah.
Mr. Hallahan, do you happen to recall?
Well,
How this was done?
Yeah, there's been certain capital expenses that they've requested in the past in their budget.
In their
And there's
budget.
some capital items that the town has paid for on the town side, under Public Works or some other category. And see, I know that the way you're looking at it, that's one perspective. The opposite side of it is that they may feel that there is no need for certain capital items to be included in the budget because they've been able to accumulate surplus funds in the past. So I know that you can look at the surplus funds as some sort of budget, or you might be looking at it as some sort of slush fund. But in reality, the whole purpose of this was to get them to be more efficient, to reduce their operating expenses in such a way that they can accommodate capital expenses that they would have had to request in the current budget or in a future budget. So it is saving us money because they, like any department or any organization with the facilities they have and the needs that they have to provide, they do have capital needs. And so this allows them to reduce line items in the aggregate and come up with, hopefully, funds at the end of the year that will allow them to enhance security or to provide materials or fixtures or whatever that they would have to make a request for. So, you know, I see this as an incentive to reduce operating expenses. Sir?
Well, that was the way it was designed about 11 years ago.
That was our thought process
Right.
behind the whole.
That was before the state statute was memorialized, and I worked that out with Bob Cronin at the time. So I would add one other thing to what you said. We would bond in the past for any big capital that they had, and we've done that even with the security. So the whole intentions of this, the whole intention, was to not have the Board of Ed spend for the sake of spending on items that weren't necessarily needed, that would have ended up being stockpiled. I'm going back 10 years now. We created this model where if they didn't spend the dollars that the town voted for in a referendum, and we voted for here, we would give it back to them in a capital fund. And I keep going back to the Common Core story, where when Common Core came in, they needed, I think it was $355,000 to $400,000 in capital to upgrade the technology. But because they came in with a surplus, they didn't spend the money that was allocated to them. They used that money. Now that Common Core technology, coming back to your point, Michael, that would have been a request in the following budget we would have had to fund. I think that's what you were just saying, right? So,
Yeah. Now, I understand what Ms. Barrett is saying here, and it is always a challenge for the Board of Finance that is in charge of seeing how each department expends their money on a line-by-line basis, to give up this freedom, to let the freedom go to the Board of Ed to decide on a line-by-line basis how they should spend their money or make adjustments throughout the year. And if those adjustments end up with a savings, then, you know, I think what we have here is a remedy that provides some sort of oversight or transparency or some sort of an acknowledgement that we have to endorse or at least understand. And so I think that this provides the level of oversight that allows them to make the moves that may save money in the long run. So, but I agree with you what you're saying. But and from an idealistic point of view, sure, we would like to have more strings attached. But we have to have a working system that, one, trusts the Board of Ed to make decisions that are right for the education of the children and for the long-term mission and suffices to take care of their facilities and programs and so forth, and doesn't hamper them in a way that somehow is unproductive. And if we require them to go and spend certain funds from certain line items before somehow it's eligible or contributes to the ability to accumulate a surplus, then again, that might push them into spending too much in the wrong areas where it becomes less than optimal. So, I understand how it can be viewed, but this seems to be within state statute and within reason the right balance and the right accommodation.
Thank you, Mike.
So,
I don't know
so
if that
just to
makes
clarify, at the end of the fiscal year, when the Board of Ed calculates what their budget is, they have the ability to transfer some amount of money independent of this board into special education and medical, as well as throughout the year. And the only thing we have control over is the amount that is transferred into this Fund 373 that will be combined with their capital improvement fund. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding.
And currently, the capital improvement fund includes not only surplus funds, but it also includes funds from PTAs and other sources of fundraising, so it's all in one pot. So now
I
we're
don't
gonna
have
be
any knowledge of that. You may be correct, but that's not my understanding.
PTAs are not captured in their budget.
Right.
None of this is captured in the
I
budget.
know, but
That's the whole point.
PTAs operate separately. They're their own they have their own tax code. Whatever they do for the school is PTA driven. It has nothing to do with the school. I'm the treasurer for the high school PTA, so
Correct.
it's completely separate.
So if you look at our special funds report, and we'll get to this later, and you look at BOE capital improvement, you'll see a beginning fund balance of a hair under $600,000. That is a combination of not just surplus funds, but also fundraising from the various elementary schools is all put into that one capital improvement fund. So if we're going to fold that into 373, we need to be aware that we are actually mixing not just surplus funds, but also
Well, I
these
can
other
tell you
sources.
as
I'm not sure why they would do
treasurer,
that.
yeah, that
And it's
that
all
is not,
extra budgetary.
if they want to do, they do fundraising, the money comes to me, and then we give back to the school, however we want to give back. We want to have ice cream for the kids, the whole high school. Anything that's raised comes to me, and then I put it out. It doesn't go through the school. They do not have control of that PTA money. I do, in this case.
Nancy, that's not anything I've ever heard. I don't know why, by the way, they would do that, especially given that this memorandum of agreement is staring them in the face. If they got dollars from some other source where they didn't have at least these kind of guardrails around it, why they would subject them to the guardrails is beyond me.
So, I mean, you just have to look at the special fund for capital improvement, and you'll see that there's both negative numbers and positive numbers, so.
Well, that doesn't tell me that it came from the PTA.
It didn't come from PTA. If they
Well-
come to us and say, hey, would you like to help us with,
All
again,
right.
I'm gonna pick on the ice cream.
I'd like to
I'm
offer
telling you,
the
It's a different story.
So the point is, this is all extra budgetary, all of it. All of these reserve funds are all extra budgetary, and so we just need to be aware that A, there will be commingling of funds, and B, that the Board of Ed will have at their disposal not only the money that the town approves, but also the grants and these various reserve funds. And we will only have control over the surplus funds that they want to put in
Well,
capital.
they're always in control of their own grants. We don't have control of their grants.
No, I'm just saying, for the purpose of understanding, the grants can actually not just supplement, but can replace operating expenses. And if they replace an operating expense, then they're freeing up taxpayer dollars to be spent some other way. And so their budget is actually greater than what we are approving through a referendum.
But that's way off topic, okay?
No, of course, it is all absolutely related.
We went through this last meeting, Nancy, when you raised the question of where the grants were, and we talked about the fact that, the revenue and expenses are not in the budget. That was the question I think you asked, okay? Look, I think we all
That
recognize...
was at the workshop. That was at the workshop.
Yes, it was the workshop. I think we all recognize that the Board of Ed gets grants. And they spend them according to whatever the grant details are, which I have no knowledge of, because we don't really ever get into that, okay? You may be right, that there may be some grants that they can apply to operating expenses, which does free up cash for something else. I wouldn't really dispute that. It makes sort of sense, right? But that's just the way they run it. I mean, we've had some grants that we've gotten, we've been able to apply some of the dollars to our own expenses here in town, and some capital. That's just the way the grants are written, and we've taken advantage of it, just like I would expect anyone would.
Right. Well, I'm just saying that we need to be aware that they have access to these various funds that will cover operating expenses, grants, as well as these reserve funds. And I use the example of special ed. Why would they have a special ed legal expense line item if they can just use the special ed reserve funds to pay for it right off the bat? Right?
But
That doesn't make
I'm not
sense.
going to belabor
All
the
right,
point,
yeah.
but special ed legal, that's a whole other
Yeah.
different topic that I
Right.
don't think we want to bring into this.
Right, but it's the same issue with capital. If they don't have a capital budget, and they can certainly just, go to their capital fund, if they can just go to this reserve, then, they're supplementing the budget that we approve.
All right, I'd like to offer the following resolution. Resolved that the memorandum agreement between the Board of Finance and the Board of Education concerning Fund 373, unexpended prior year fund, is hereby approved, and the chairman of the Board of Finance is authorized to execute same on behalf of the Board of Finance. I'll take a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Mr. Halligan, did you vote?
Yes.
Thank you.
In the affirmative.
Okay, thank you. And I will make sure that we conform the titles.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's go to the reports. Let's start with the revenue, if we could, please. Any questions on the revenue? Ingrid is here. I had just one, and actually Gary's here, so Gary may help too. The arrears taxes, Ingrid, do we collect that throughout the year, or just at a certain point during the year? Because we've collected none of it.
I think Stacy's here.
Stacy, I'm sorry, I thought.
Sorry, what was the question?
The arrears taxes, Stacy, do we collect that at certain points during the year, or just at one point during the year?
Every single day.
So we haven't collected any this year?
Of course we have.
Okay, then maybe Ingrid can look into that with Stacy.
Okay.
Because it's showing that we haven't collected any. You see that? Under tax revenue, the second item?
There were some offsets from the BAA, but...
Yeah, but
Yeah,
It's a
It
negative
would-
number.
It's a
It
negative
wouldn't-
number.
okay,
it must just be some type of typo because we collected everything.
okay, all right, thanks, Stacy.
Did we just not account for previous months of accumulation of the supplemental auto tax? You got, in 1 month, you got an 836,000?
Month of January.
I have it underlined, yes.
Stacy's here.
Supplemental motor vehicle tax bills aren't billed until January.
January. Twice a year.
No, not
Oh,
twice
oh,
a
no,
year.
sorry, just automotive is once a year, right?
Supplementals are in January, regular taxes are in July. We collect throughout the year for the July taxes, which are regular, and then we start collecting in January for supplementals, and that's normal, state statute.
I wish every month could be January.
Well, wait, I'm sorry. Stacy, you said the bills go out when?
Excuse me. Motor vehicle tax is normal. The normal cycle is that you receive your bill in North Haven every July. There are certain statutory exceptions that require supplemental billing in January of every year.
Okay, so then we may have a problem with reports, because if the bills just went out in January, we couldn't have collected $837,000 in 1 month, right?
Yeah, I think that might be off.
Yeah. We might look into that, Ingrid.
Okay.
But if you'd like, I can get reports together and show you exactly what was collected.
No,
Well, maybe-
I accept the number as listed, 836, beautiful.
Well, you said you wish every,
No problem.
you wish every month would be January, but what you want to say is you wish every month would be July.
All right, Ingrid, could you work
I
with
will look
Stacy,
into
please, on
this,
that?
yes.
So I'd just like to point out, thank you, Mr. Frieda, for following through on the MRSA accounting.
Yeah.
That is now showing nothing until the end of the year. So I appreciate that, or until we receive it in the third month of June. And secondly, very impressive interest on short-term investments of almost a little over $250,000 year-to-date, 30,000 just last month. I was wondering if it would be possible to get a breakdown of the town miscellaneous receipts. Again, only because we budgeted 200,000 and we've already received almost 600,000.
One was a big check, right? One was one big item, right?
Yeah, we certainly could do that. What is in here, though, is an additional $453,000 that we received from the state that we thought we were going to get, but Ed and I decided not to budget for it because there was a question mark, and that's a big portion of that. But we can certainly get a breakdown of what the miscellaneous
And what was
receipts
that for from the state?
are. It was a share of the sales tax that went up.
Okay. Okay, and still nothing from Quinnipiac, and I see our current taxes are at 94.2%, and total tax revenue is at 92.9%. Are we going to continue getting that printout of our tax collection?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
By year and by month? That would be
Yes.
really helpful to
Yes.
get that
We
once
get that
again.
in March.
Right. By the way, Quinnipiac, that payment comes in June. So,
June, oh,
right.
okay, that's good to know.
Any other revenue questions? All right, if not, why don't we talk about the expenses? I will say this, just my own personal scanning of them this afternoon, not surprising. I do see building supplies are up. Building maintenance and repair, which has been an item that some of the members have mentioned over the past few months. Some of the utilities are higher, some are actually still in line. And I would also point out that it's shown that we've expended 64.5% of our budget, but about 5% of that is the fact that we've paid basically virtually our entire bond payments during the year, which my calculation represents about 5%. So we're at about 59%, and on a prorated basis, we'd be at 58.3, so we're actually tracking decently.
Thank you for that overview.
You're welcome.
I'm looking at page 6, the reserve accrued benefits. Are we over so much just because the number of folks in the town that have retired?
Yes, yes, it's,
Do we know like,
it's,
how many we expected versus how many actual?
we don't usually, it's really difficult to budget for retirement.
Okay.
It's just the decision that a person makes, but we have had more retirements than the previous years.
Ingrid, give me 1 second. Well, I'll allow the other, if the other members have questions, go ahead. I'll find what I'm looking for in a second.
It's a public works question, and maybe Mr. Frieda can answer here. On page 13 of the report here, it's within the streets and roads section, the encumbrance for winter maintenance supplies. When we have a warmer
Thank you.
winter than usual, are
Yep.
we allowed to reduce that encumbrance? Is there a chance that
We are looking into that.
renege on some of the
Yes,
purchase,
225,000.
Yeah, we're looking into that.
Renegotiate.
Yeah, we're looking into that, as Ingrid said. We talked in previous meetings about the cost per ton of salt going up dramatically.
Yeah.
So the encumbrance is in there. Now, we don't know what the future is going to be in the next few months. on
Can that
storage.
encumbrance number be reduced?
We're good.
Well, this one is already a commitment. It just depends on the contract.
So this,
All right.
so this encumbrance is committed because of the fact that we're projecting there may be a storm. We're going to need some salt, so.
Okay. And if that encumbrance has to do with material that we are obligated to accept, would we be able to reduce that line item in the budget that we're calculating at the moment.
Is your question, Michael, if we have, in other words, a surplus of salt that we can
Yeah.
reduce next
That's a
year?
good question.
The answer
Yeah,
would
that's a
be
good
yes,
question.
yes.
All right, okay. Well, yeah, just find out if we have to purchase everything that we've projected to purchase, and if we have to purchase that, what benefits might it give us?
I think the benefit would be, as you said, an offset next year's projected line item.
Expenses.
Okay.
Ingrid, the question I was searching for is the last item on page 16, the water fire protection. We expended $371 during the month, and we're basically fully expended for the year. Is
What
that,
page?
sorry, page 16, the very last item. So are you expecting that that will be the full bill for the year, or that we might
Yes, I
get
am
other?
expecting that that will be the
That's
full
it then, okay.
billing for the year, yeah.
Okay.
It was tracking a little bit higher last year too.
Okay.
I did look into that today.
So we must make 1 or 2 payments a year
2
then?
payments a year.
Okay,
And
Right.
that public utility has gone up in cost too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
On the previous page, on page 15, it could be that we discussed this before, but for the senior center, under personnel full-time, we're now basically, we've expended that entire amount. Was somebody hired that wasn't budgeted?
No, I did review that and I'm looking into that with Human Resources.
Okay,
It seems like it was miscoding on their expenses.
I see.
And
It had to do with
also-
community services. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I thought it was just being offset with the budget for the part-time.
No, that one has,
No.
I think it has to do some, towards the fact that that position was budgeted in a different line. But I will get back to you on that. I did see that today.
Sure. And on page 17, excuse me, under pension and social security, the actuarial expense, again, we budgeted 55,000, and it looks like we've spent almost 90,000, including a $32,000 expense just this month. Was there some,
I did spoke to HR today about that. There are some reports that are state mandates that they have to do every 2 years. That didn't happen the previous 2 years, so it did happen this year. That's why we see the overage. And they also do actual for recently retirements. So that's why we had more retirements this year.
if I can just add to that, so what happens is when we have retirements and then we bring in people at a 457, 401A, we have to do an actuarial reanalysis of what the contributions would be on the annual required contribution. So our utilization rate of our actuaries increases when we have retirements.
retirements? Got it, okay. And since we have some folks here from the police department as well as the police commission, it seems as though overtime and, let's see, starting on page 8, overtime and holidays are kind of up there in the 82% and 73% range, as well as,
You can question that in the workshop.
yes, and we can certainly address that, but I just wanted, it was true for both police and fire, that I happened to notice that overtime seemed to be a little bit on the high side.
I can answer that.
Sure.
On the police side, we have three officers that are out for injuries, and they also, there will be a 24,000 adjustment to that line due to outside duty that we have to adjust. And on the fire side, let's see. Are you talking about the
So
overtime?
overtime for the fire department is historically very low, because they also have the contractual replacement staffing, which is at 86% currently.
Right, I do have to look into
But
that.
I think he said in the workshop, someone went to the military, and that was a loss there. He talked about that on the workshop, so that's part of it.
Right, but that would be contractual replacement staffing, not necessarily overtime. The overtime is at 86%, and typically each year, that's significantly under budget.
I can look into that.
Right. And I know that the chief mentioned that their costs of medical supplies have gone up. but
Yeah, they're substantially.
We're already at 125% of the budgeted amount for that particular thing. And likewise, building maintenance and repairs, we're at 81% with looks like a $30,000 encumbrance. Any idea what that might be, Mike?
I'm sorry,
I'm sorry.
ask the question.
There's a $30,000 encumbrance for building maintenance and repair for the fire department.
What page are you on, Nancy?
Page 10.
Page 10, down the bottom, building maintenance and repairs, they're currently at about 82%. They've spent about $64,000,
Yeah,
$115,000, and they have a $30,000 encumbrance.
So there's an open PO, I know, for propane gas. There was some preventive maintenance on drains that were overflowing, and that might explain that.
There's also, they had to rent a pumper because one of them got crashed in the highway, and they had some other car repairs.
I see. So, but this is building maintenance and repairs as opposed to vehicle maintenance and repairs.
The vehicle?
No. So this line item shouldn't relate to any vehicles or rental.
Oh, no, that was saying for the vehicle, for 360. For 410, it's just maintenance supplies increases throughout.
Right.
But propane, Nancy, and the preventive maintenance on the drains that are flooding and overflowing, that was a large expense, and that probably is most of that.
I think most of what Tim highlighted is what we're seeing in here too. Things that we question all the time,
Right.
especially you and I.
Right. With the library, I just see, once again, building maintenance and repairs, I see a $26,000 encumbrance. Is there something that's...
Yes,
going on?
there was an emergency repair to the stairs. A couple of residents almost fell, so they had to do a repair on that.
Wow. $26,000, okay. And the heating, and I thought they just got a new...
She
boiler.
explained it, like, in her workshop, what happens is that they think that because it wasn't one of the, one of the boilers, it wasn't working properly, when they repair, it kind of like, now that it's working properly, that's why it's taking up more
I see.
energy, right?
Any other questions on expenses? If not, let's go into special funds.
As far as we know, we have not used any MRSA funds so far this year, is that correct?
If we have, there would be negligible at this point. So that's primarily streets and roads. So I would say if we have, it's negligible. When there's a storm, there will be, though.
I think when we were using the old accounting
Right.
system, as of the end of December, we had a negative number of, like, let's say $380,000, something like
Yeah.
that, that I assumed could be applied, you know, once we get the money. So I guess the real question is, why aren't streets and roads over budget by like $400,000 by this point?
You know what? I'm not sure if the 387 included a vehicle purchase. That maybe was part of that, one of a waiver. We'll check that out, okay?
Okay. And we have listed here the fire inspection revenue that's been brought in, but also, if you look at fire paramedic, revenue. It looks like they brought in about $6,000 in January for a total of about maybe a little over $13,000 for the year, which is about 15% of the budgeted total for fire paramedic.
Do we
All right, why
know
don't we go-
anything about the middle school phone system replacement? It just caught my eye considering the phone system was
I saw that. It
part
seemed
of the,
a lot
part of
money.
the building committee, that's why I'm asking.
I'm not sure. No.
Could we ask the Board of Ed? Yes. Thank you.
All right, let's go on to the Board of Ed report.
One thing that I'd just like to announce in case everyone didn't hear this on the local news, but they have passed legislation that allows for free lunch for all Connecticut schools for the remainder of this year. So I know that North Haven has gone back to charging for lunch as of January, so again, I don't know exactly how logistically this is going to work in terms of getting money from the state, but at least for this academic year, that would be paid for by the state, which is great news.
Yes.
And really levels the playing field, removes the stigma associated with free and reduced lunches, and I think enables the students to really be able to perform academically.
Yeah, the education report has very little new in it, but in noting that the medical, dental, prescription reserve account that they've accumulated up over $3 million, that has got to add to the safety aspect of our town in terms of how bond agencies would look at it. So, Mr. Freer, I'm sure you bring that to the attention of others, that being self-insured, we have really significantly increased our reserves and lowered risk.
You're absolutely right. The rating agencies love that part of what we present.
Yeah, and that's a change that's made on their part through their budgeting. So they deserve recognition.
I have a question, maybe you can ask them as well. So they talked about this reimbursable wages. It says new line, no budget, get reimbursed from preschool. So I'm like, I don't understand that. There's a preschool that's been there for a while. I don't know if that's related or if they're just, I don't know, splitting it out for transparency. I'm not sure what that means. If we could
Okay.
find out. Thank you.
Diane, were we looking at expense when you said that? What were we looking at there?
Yeah, it's 1128.
Let's just take a look at that for a second.
They put a commentary on the board that this is a new line item, no budget, and they get reimbursed from the preschool. Well, there's been a preschool there for quite some time, so that's just trying to have a better understanding what that is.
We'll check it out. That might be the Boys and Girls Club that they have a preschool program with.
There was a
I'll double
preschool
check.
program attached to the high school.
Or you're talking about high school?
Yeah, I'm talking about the high school. Well, I'm making that assumption, I don't really know,
Okay.
because that's something new, so I'm making that assumption. I could be totally wrong, that's why I'm asking.
All right, we'll
It's
check.
more for information.
We'll check it out. So,
And it looks like overall, the Board of Ed budget is at about 63.9%, which is a little bit on the high side. Again, I think, as Diane pointed out, they're waiting for some reimbursements on some of their expenditures, but I think that's worth noting.
It's always hard to tell. They encumber so much on this budget, it's very difficult to tell where they are. All right, I'll take a motion on the reports.
Make a second.
Well, I'll make the motion, first motion.
Thank you.
I'll be the second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right, that brings us to public comment. Sally?
Sally Green, 5 Blossom Drive. I would also like to make a comment about the passing in my office. I want to express my condolences to all of the members for losing a colleague, and Mike, to you for your losing a special friend. I always found Jim to be a gentleman in every respect, personally, professionally, and politically, always a gentleman. He believed strongly in civil discourse at meetings, which I believed in strongly as well. And so I just wanted to pass my condolences to all of you and to his family, who I had the pleasure of meeting today at the services. I wanted to ask, if you look at, I have a question on the proposed budget for 23-24, on page 42, the employment table.
Sally, the budget really isn't in front of us in this meeting.
Okay. Well, I wanted to make a comment about the fire department workshop, which there's no public comment is allowed there.
You're free to make comments, obviously it's public comment.
Okay.
But it's not a budget discussion, and I'm sure if you have a question, Mike would be happy to get you the information afterwards.
Okay. My comment is, based on the fact that the union agreement expired on June 30th, 2022, we have not, the Board of Selectmen has not renewed it. My comment is, I am confused as to why the firefighter grade A is going up $209,680. There are no new positions. It should only be going up about $80,000, which would be the half year for the 2 new ones. And in fact, I believe that's what you had said as a workshop, Mike, which is not an executive session meeting. It was our Board of Selectmen workshop. The only new positions were adding a half for each of the 2 new firefighters hired in this current fiscal year. So I'm just wondering, why is it going up $209,000 rather than 80 as it went up for the current fiscal year?
Well, there's no new firefighters in this budget, so we'll check it out. We'll
Okay.
make a note of that, okay?
Right, right. And so that was really my primary question or comment. Again,
That's for delayed contractual increase as well?
Well, so we haven't, we are going to be calling a Board of Selectmen meeting to ratify, to review this contract in the next couple of weeks, okay? So we're close to getting that resolved. But your question again, Mike, is?
No, it might have to do with cumulative contractual increases for multiple years.
Well,
those are paid from the contractual obligation line in the personnel policy.
Yeah, for previous years.
Right.
But for this year, you'll see the increase that is retroactive.
so look.
Usually you don't
yeah.
see it until the CBA is approved.
Right, it's expired.
That's why, for example, you see a big spike in the police department personnel line because we renewed that CBA on April 7th of 2022.
Yeah,
We haven't renewed for
I agree with you.
fire.
I think that there might be something that was
So-
I just wanted-
incorrectly projected.
Yeah, so let me,
Last year it only went up
Yeah.
80, so I thought it would only go up 80 this year as well.
Right, so
And it's 209.
right. So here's what we'll check, Ingrid, okay? We know that the wage component of the fire contract, that's pretty much an agreement. That's not going to change, even though it's not ratified. Just double check to see if downstairs that they projected that wage increase in there,
Okay.
even though it's not ratified, okay?
Okay.
All right?
Because it just expired in June.
Yes.
And usually we don't ratify till almost,
Yeah.
almost the next one is expired.
That's right.
We usually, so for you to say we might be doing it in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
We usually do it a couple of years after it expires.
Yeah,
and
well,
give the retro, and then we use the contractual
The new-
obligation.
the new director of administration is making it a priority to keep the contracts a bit more
He's been
current.
given an edict, solve these contracts sooner, so.
Right.
Okay, well, that would
That's what's
be,
happening, yeah.
So that could be part of the confusion, but we haven't yet, so
Right.
that's, and I didn't expect to for another year at least.
Oh, it'll be much sooner, so.
Okay.
So,
Thank you very much for
You're
your
welcome.
time and attention.
Thank you, Sally.
Yeah. If it's settled between now and referendum time, or
Yeah.
agreed to,
right. And that's what we're going to check, Ingrid's going to check, because it's a
Yeah.
possibility, what you said. It's a possibility.
thank you.
Anyone else?
I just had a quick question, oh, I'm sorry, any other public commentary? I just had a quick question for Mr. Frida, but after public commentary.
I think you can probably go, Nancy.
I just had a question about when do you think we'll be closing the books on the town side for the 2021-22 fiscal year and meet with the auditor, Mr. Santafanti?
So I would say Joe Sanfani will appear before us in April. He's coming in here next week to meet with us. He needs some additional information. So in terms of the closing, I mean, a lot of that, Nancy, is, you know, him having to digest the information we give him, and then we're sort of at his discretion in terms of when he can close it. But I anticipate CAFR discussion in April here.
April.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just have a quick item here. I think Ms. Mayor may have asked this question last meeting, but with regard to ARPA funds, do we have any unexpended funds at this time from the ARPA program? Because we have 2 years from date of receipt to make use of them. Is that right?
We have no unexpended funds that include encumbrances for projects of which there's no purchase order. So what we're analyzing now is what projects can we hold off and not use ARPA funds, and because we have a revenue item in here in this budget.
Yeah, so, right, so the question was, is there any possible changes you can make to your ARPA budget
Yes.
projection
Yes.
that might allow for utilization for maybe for capital items or other items that would qualify under ARPA, that other towns
Yes.
have taken advantage of?
Yeah. The answer is
You know,
yes.
and that could have a meaningful impact on this budget, which right now is you know, unacceptable in its raw form,
Right.
you know, to the public.
Mhm.
It's not anything we're gonna put out for a vote to the public, the
That's
way
right.
it is now.
Right.
And so, you know, I know that we've got the MRSA funds for some public works items, but if there's anything senior citizen, senior center related, right, and there may be many categories, and I just didn't know if you were willing to make changes to the ARPA budget, the ARPA projection,
We are. We're willing to
the
make the
expense budget
changes.
that you have presented to us previously.
Yep, we're willing to make changes, yes.
Thank you. Very important to know.
Thank you, Mike. All right. I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the regular session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Since we are past 7, we'll move right into the workshops. I think registrar's voter is up first. I did ask at some of the other workshops, most of us know each other, but for the people at home, if the presenters could just introduce themselves, and
Sure.
thank you.
Lori Jean Hannon, Republican Registrar of Voters.
Well, Jim Carew, Democrat Registrar of Voters.
So we'll make this short and sweet for everybody. We are asking for an increase. What you have in your packet, you can throw that away because we're asking for a lot less than what was in that. However, yes, there is always a however. We do need to have some increases along the line for paper supplies, budgets, ballots, that kind of thing, because paper has gone up tremendously for our department. And as I say, we even look for more envelopes all the time. There's a lot of stuff. So we don't run just elections, so there's a lot else that happens down there. But the other thing that is critical is minimum wage is going up, so we have to pay our patrol workers more. So that's the biggest increase that we have. But it's less than what we had originally thought. However, we do need everybody to be aware of the fact that after the November election, early voting was passed, and we have no idea, no one in the state right now has any idea how that's going to impact budgets. So it could double what we're asking for if it goes through. We are actually hosting a meeting here in North Haven on Tuesday morning with the New Haven County Registrar of Voters, and the Secretary of State is coming in to give us some information. She'd like to have it happen quickly, but nothing has been set in stone yet as to how any early voting will take place. And it's going to have a huge impact on budgets going forward. So right now, we're only asking for $72.91 as an increase for this budget. But next year, I can guarantee you there'll be a lot more money that we'll need to ask for because early voting will happen.
Is there any chance to get any type of state subsidies for early
We
voting?
don't know.
Don't
There's
know.
nothing out there yet.
Nothing is out there yet.
Okay.
It could be as simple as just an expansion of early day registration, expansion of absentee, or maybe 14 days going into it. We don't know any of it.
Okay.
And we don't even know if it'll happen next year.
Right.
We do have a primary in this budget, so there'll be a presidential primary in April of 2024. So that's one more budget, one more election that we would have.
So Lori Jean, just to get the number down for the members and for our book here,
So, yeah. I have new.
you're asking for once, yeah, that'd be good, yeah. Right,
I got it.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
But if I did my math, just using your budget now, which in our books is 122,438, is it 117,125? Is that accurate?
I didn't have the personnel line on there, so I don't have
Okay,
all the numbers that you guys have.
all right. Oh, they put it, okay.
So really, if you'll see on that sheet, the only increase we're looking at is the 2 line items, and the majority of it has to do with minimum wage.
So actually, from what I can tell, the difference in our books and what you have here is election day. It was in the book at 49.2, it's here at 45,141.
Correct.
Okay.
And since we are on camera, we'll put out a plug. If anybody wants to work the elections, please let us know. Especially Native Republicans, believe it or not.
Okay. Any of the members have questions on the Registrar of Voters budget? Great, thank you so much.
Thank you for your dedication.
Thank you.
Gary?
Good job.
Good evening, I'm Gary John, the assessor in North Haven. The budget I presented is, the bottom line is the same as it has been in the previous year for the main budget and a slight reduction for the Board of Assessment Appeals budget. I've just made some minor line item changes in the amounts for reflecting actual usage and my projected plans for the upcoming year. The only significant, we went from, everything is going up in cost. Particularly our services, our software services are going up. And I've reflected that as best I could within the limits on the QDS Equality GIS, raising that to 31,000 from 30. Our actual was 28 last year. It will be around 31 based on the information I have now. And I have taken some money from the bookbinding and added it to the GL printing. It's kind of 6 to 1, half dozen of the other. But the plan is, we don't bind the field cards anymore. We have them printed out, but there's still a significant cost to have them printed. And adding them to the GL printing and maps, I'd like to start we haven't digitized very much. I'm like just investigating right now, digitizing some of our old permanent records. So that's just maybe a little bit of seed money in there to try to start doing that. The other items, the professional appraisals and personal property audits are the same. They're pretty consistent. Personal property audits we've been doing for a number of years at the same rate. And they produce various amounts every year, but you know, this year maybe $100,000 return for the $120,000 expense. So you know, it varies from year to year on what if we planned the right accounts to be audited, and so it varies.
Gary, in the current year, we've expended 10, and our revenue budget showed 0 for revenue. Is that accurate, do you think?
For
the current year, we've expended 10 for the personal property tax audits, and we're showing revenue of 0. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, because we've only started. 10,000 is the first payment for the auditor.
Yeah.
Then he completes his work. Once he completes his work, he gets billed for the second half.
Okay.
And then we process the results.
So most of the revenue's in the back half of the year. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're in the process of processing the audit results. Most of them have been returned to us.
Okay.
But they require a lot of review before we send anything out to the taxpayer.
Okay.
The Board of Assessment Appeals is just a reduction, and we're in the middle of a reval cycle, so there aren't that many appeals right now, and I don't anticipate that many this year, or next year for that matter. At the time of the next reval, I will probably have to ask for an increase in those lines just to bring them back up to their actual usage. And that's about it.
Gary, what year will be the reval?
2024.
2024. Okay, thank you.
And that's brings up another topic, actually. We have to start planning for that reval. It takes a good year of work before that reval date in order to get all the work done.
That's a physical?
Well,
yeah.
No, this is
statistical. Yeah.
So it's a lot easier and a lot cheaper, but it still needs to be
right.
It still needs to be money that's expended. That was handled by a reserve account.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
It's in the budget.
Not through my budget.
No, it's in the budget every year. I saw it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Gary, do you have the grand list printout for us?
No, we're going to be getting that out to everybody tomorrow morning. We'd hope to have it tonight, but we were tied up this afternoon. So.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, that's a request that I make every year. The detailed grand list report that goes to Smith.
OPM.
Yes, and the property records are handled through
Equality.
Equality, yeah. Are you satisfied with their service in their database? Yeah. And GIS expenditures, is that through engineering?
No, that's my budget. That's included in this line item. They are the primary user of it, but I pay for it.
Okay.
So if you want to transfer this to Public Works, that's more than more than happy.
Sorry.
No.
Between you and them. Very nice.
All right. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gary.
Good evening, Stacey Yarber. I'm the tax collector and town clerk. I have submitted both of my budgets to you, and pretty straightforward, but I have a few extra comments to add on top of what I've provided. First and foremost, what I'd like to point out on the tax side is that, as you all know, postage is going up and is expected to go up again in approximately 6 months. The United States Postal Service. That's approximately a 9% increase in postage and could happen again. So as you will see on my my tax line item, everything to do with actual postage for the taxes and the vendor is all lumped into the postage line item. And so because of the increase in costs of pay, pretty much the increase of everything these days, as everyone else has probably explained to you, I can't guarantee that that won't go up, because it probably will. Another area I'd like to discuss is the town clerk side.
If I could just interrupt, Stacy, I just don't want to move too fast off the tax collector's office in case the members had questions on that.
absolutely.
And then,
I mean-
if you don't mind, we'll do the town
No,
clerk
not
next.
at all.
So before we move off the tax collector, she was talking about the postage. Obviously, there's a 19% increase there. It's about $8,000. There's a very small increase in dollars in office supplies and equipment, and a slight reduction in personnel part-time. Any questions on tax collector before we go to town clerk?
So the 19% in that.
Nine.
What,
9,000, it was, sorry, 8,000, Stacy, it's showing it. Yeah,
I'm sorry, I thought-
19%, yeah, that's right, yeah.
I thought you meant the increase in postage, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's shown here as 8, Stacy, but it's 19%.
Yeah. I've been advised by my vendor that there is we will have an increase on the postage because of the U.S. Postal Service increase.
9%, okay, and the other,
No, 19, it's 19%.
19%, so the other 10%,
Vendor fees.
okay.
Okay, thank you, let's go on to town clerk. Sorry, Nick, were you gonna say something?
Nope.
Okay.
Just a quick question. Stacy, have you had any part-time help this year?
I was able to, we went quite some time in both of my offices with no part-time staff, and we are fully staffed at this point. I've had someone in tax for almost 5 months now,
Okay.
and in the town clerk side, almost a year.
Okay.
But we went almost 2 years with both of those positions, both part-time positions unfilled, and that was mostly due to COVID.
Okay. It was budgeted, right?
It was budgeted.
Blank.
Yeah.
And then we have it obviously budgeted for the current fiscal year, so that's why I'm asking.
Yes.
for-
Yes, so it's actually being used this time,
Okay, great.
and that's for both offices. Okay. And so if there's no other questions about tax, I'll move on to town clerk. And what I would like to talk about is something that the registrar of voters have discussed, and it is definitely a point of contention and concern, is the possibility of there being, as soon as this municipal election, a change in the way absentee balloting and early voting will be done. And we have no idea what's going to happen. It all is reliant upon what goes on up at the state in the next few months. So I can't tell you what will happen, but I can say that it will be expensive not only for the registrars, but it will change the way I do business in the town clerk's office, most likely. Furthermore, another thing that the registrars didn't bring up, because we don't really know the answer, the tabulators, the machines we use to count votes, are so outdated. They are going to have to be updated, and there is no guarantee of any type of state aid, so that could be a huge expense for the town coming down the line.
So when you say coming down the line, do you mean in this fiscal year or perhaps next year?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
They came to us like a year or two
unfortunate.
ago, that came up.
Yeah, it's come up before. I know,
It's
yeah.
come up before,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, I mean, I'm sure the registrars have mentioned it multiple times, but we're using like zombie parts. They're not me. They are taking parts and using them, and I think we're down a tabulator, aren't we?
Not anymore.
No,
Oh,
so
okay,
the,
good.
the point is that they are at the end of life, these tabulators, and that will be an expense that the town will, I don't know if the town will see it or not. You know, back in the olden days, the state paid for absentee balloting. That ended about a year after I started working here. And so that's just another expense. And one other thing I was going to mention is that in December, on Christmas Day, my land records vendor had a cyber attack, and it wiped out their system for nearly a month. I couldn't record land records.
Wow.
I couldn't do business for almost a month. And so I have actively started looking at other vendors just to see what's out there. But you may see some fluctuation in the month of December to January, but when we had to catch up
Yeah.
on the fees and land record recordings, et cetera, just because of what had happened. And so I don't know what will come of my search, but of course I will report it to everyone as I
Okay.
learn more information. We are back up and running, everything's great, knock on wood, but it was a rough month.
Yeah, I'm sure. So for this budget, though, I see a modest increase of 4%, and it's really all personnel, though, right?
That's correct.
Nothing else is going up.
No, I try to keep it all together.
We all do, and most of us fail, that's the problem.
I did have a question. We've had the same land record auditors for as long as I've been in office, so that's almost 14 years. Has there been a discussion on changing it, or perhaps increasing the fee to the currently existing auditors?
I couldn't even tell what the land auditors do, so it's never come up in front of, that I know of.
So we could talk about that offline.
I'm just curious, because I didn't budget for any of that. Okay, great. Thank you. And they come in and they go through my year's records to make sure we are doing it correctly. It's a state statutory requirement.
Okay.
Any other questions for me, for either of my offices?
Try
Okay.
to find a vendor who takes care
Yeah.
of cybersecurity.
Right, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to just throw it out there. The move is to go to the cloud. Everyone
Oh,
wants to
sure.
go to the
Yeah.
cloud.
I know, and everyone says the cloud's not hackable, but it is.
Oh, yeah.
Anything is hackable, but obviously they didn't have a lot of
Well, you know,
options there.
things happen, but I
Yeah.
will put a little plug in. We have the best IT department in this town. Alex is on top of it. He's always there, and he's always got a remedy, and he's just wonderful. So I just think that I can't say good enough things about him because he's so great. His department is wonderful. So.
That's good to hear.
That's great.
All right, thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Stacy.
She pays for salary increase herself. Is that handled through the administrator's contract or anything like that? or
No, no.
No.
Okay.
Evening, Chief.
Two fine-looking gentlemen.
We're going to roll right into this, or are you waiting for something?
Just waiting for you.
Good.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin Glenn, Chief of Police. This is Andrew Stavridis, the Deputy Chief of Police. I'd like to thank the Board of Police Commissioners for being here for this long night, showing support for the two of us, but more importantly for the budget that we are presenting this evening. So Chairman, I'd like to start with page 26, if
Thank you.
that's okay.
Yep.
The top of page 26 is our full-time personnel line. In addition to what you see in front of you, I'd like to add one full-time dispatch position. As you can imagine, between the submission for this budget in December, early December, and now, there's a lot of moving parts to public safety or any department. So we've identified a weakness there. I'd like to just briefly explain. I know it's been a long night already. Currently, we have 8 full-time positions in the dispatch center budgeted for. We have enough staffing with those budgeted positions to have 2 dispatchers at all times on the day shift, 2 dispatchers at all times on the evening shift, and on the midnight shift, between midnight and 8 o'clock in the morning, only 2 dispatchers, half the time, the other half, only 1 dispatcher. So that satisfies the needs for the police department, satisfies the needs for EMS for the most part, but we identified a weakness as it relates to the fire department with that staffing model. So we were going to attempt to reevaluate over the year, but because of some incidents that have occurred in the past few months, not to get into any specifics, we felt it was important to introduce that position this budget cycle. And that's at the cost of a salary of roughly $62,000. With fringe benefits, it's a total cost to the town, not just this budget, but cost of the town of just over $114,000, again, with fringe benefits. So if you have a pen ready, As it relates to that top line, that line would be adjusted, if approved, to $5,917,374 to reflect that $62,000 salary.
So Chief, are you saying this is an overnight position as well, or it might be at one of the other times you described?
So that position would allow us to staff a minimum of 2 dispatchers 24/7. So that would help us cover that overnight position. That's right. So aside from that additional position, the increase that you see represented at 11% overall is all contractual obligations. The police union had a contract ratified this current fiscal year, so their wages went up over 5 years. So their past contract expired June 30, 2019, so these wages represent that increase in 2019, 2020, 21, 22, and now the request for 2023. So it's a 5-year increase for them. The wage increase for the clerical union.
And usually we let some slip to 3 years. We're 5 years.
Yeah, there's reasons for it. We had, well,
Okay.
but yes, he's right.
It was a complicated.
Very complicated
union
contract.
2 to 5 years.
Sorry. Glad that it's resolved. Glad we're not going to 6 years.
So moving on, the clerical union, those wages that.
Chief, if you don't mind, just as a reminder, mostly for the board, but my recollection is too, is that the other reason this line is up, and it sort of jumps out when you look at the the payroll on the back, but we hired three uniforms mid-year, correct? So for the next year, we have the full impact for the entire year, correct?
No, this current fiscal year, we had the full impact for that. The
We
three
didn't
that
hire
were-
3 this past January?
Nope, this past July. It was a
Oh,
full
we did,
year.
okay, so that's not, okay, thank you.
And there were three the previous year, so it's a total of 6 positions have been added
Right.
over the course of a 2-year period. Is that correct, Chief?
That's correct. 3 positions in January 2022, 3 positions in July 2022. So the increase, again, aside from the full-time dispatcher that I'm requesting now, is all contractual obligations. The 5-year wage increases for the police union, 3 years of wage increases for the clerical union, and 1 year of wage increases for the dispatch union. 3 separate unions under the umbrella of the police department.
Okay.
So moving on to the next line, the school resource officer line. That is a small increase of 5%. This is not additional staffing or personnel. Our school resource officers are paid in conjunction. Their wages are tied to the grade D patrolman wages. So whenever there's an increase in the police union, the school resource officers automatically get an increase. This is the lowest wage in the police union, and that's why we tie that to the school resource officers. So there's a slight increase, and it's the first increase in their pay in the past 5 years.
Chief, I was under the impression that the supernumeraries, because that's the name of the program, were not actually tied to any union.
That's correct.
So their salaries are tied to union salaries, but they are not unionized.
So I know we talk about this often. So there's supernumeraries. That is like saying a patrolman, a sergeant, lieutenant, captain, deputy chief. They're a supernumerary officer. If I choose to assign that supernumerary officer to the school, they are a school resource officer. So the school resource officers, and there's 7 of them, 1 in every school except the high school that has 2. The school resource officer wages are tied to the grade D patrolman wages. They're not unionized, but by agreement with the town, they're tied to that, so we don't have to come back every year and negotiate a non-union member's wages. So the next line is the police commission secretary.
Chief, you can skip the small dollars.
Thank you. Overtime, it says 3% on this form. I think that's an Excel spreadsheet programming thing that just rounds up. It's a 2.5% overtime increase, and that just represents the wage increase by contract. It's not more overtime we're asking for, just to represent the wages. The holiday line, as you can see in the far left column, we spent $292,000 and change in fiscal year 2022. And so we're requesting $290,000 in that line for the next fiscal year. And that's a combination of 2 things. Juneteenth has been added, so we went in all of the unions from 13 holidays to 14 holidays. And in collaboration with the wage increases for all unions, that's what that's going to add up to, $290,000 for next year. Next line is uniform cleaning allowance. Again, this is a contractual obligation. Police, by contract, are giving X amount of dollars for cleaning and clothing. Dispatchers are also given a stipend for that, so it's just the amount of staff we have multiplied by that contractual obligation, and that's the number we come up with. Next line is training. This is what I think is a modest increase request of $10,000. In fiscal year 2022, we spent $58,000 and change, so this is on par with that year. That was the first year that we began with the police accountability bill at the time, now police accountability law, with the increase in mandatory training as well as POST, which is the state of Connecticut certification body that increased not only mandatory training but model policy. So that really drove that cost up. And again, this is spread over 56 full-time police officers as well as our dispatchers and clerical folks. So $60,000 total really is less than $1,000 per year per person. It's fairly modest. Moving on to electricity. We've been in our new and remodeled building for 3.5 years now, so we have our heads wrapped around how much it actually costs to operate the 30,000 square foot building with 88 employees, 24/7. And the communications center that draws a lot of electricity, as I'm sure you can imagine, 24 hours a day. So we spent roughly $45,000 in fiscal year 2022. We're on pace for this current fiscal year, so I just think it's responsible to adjust that from $40,000 to $45,000. Moving on, building maintenance.
Excuse me, Chief?
Sure.
Are you saying building maintenance, repairs, and supplies, or is this a different?
That was electricity.
That was electricity.
Oh, just electricity, sorry. We haven't gotten down to what I was asking about. Go ahead.
Moving on to gas and oil, I think this speaks for itself.
Yep.
We've all seen the impact of this.
Uh,
All right, so I'll move on from there, but you can see the far left column, how much we spent, how much we anticipate spending. I think this is a modest request, and this may be something that we talk about next year, depending on how the world works in the next few months. Moving on to the building maintenance, supplies, and repair that you were just touching on. This used to be three different or separate line items. It was combined many years ago, so I just want to touch on each one of those: maintenance, supplies, and repair. First, the repairs line. This is difficult to track, as you can imagine. It seems like a brand new building, but if you operate any large building 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's going to be repairs. For example, we recently had a $5,000 repair to a generator that's only 3.5 years old. We recently had an issue with hot water in our locker rooms and our bathrooms. That cost us $1,000, and then a $5,000 bill for a building security issue that we had with some of the equipment there. Those repairs, we do our best to maintain the building as best as possible, but those repairs are going to come up from time to time. Moving on to supplies, it's fairly easy to track this. Even with inflation, the supplies out of that line are really minimal, so we're not going to address that. But the maintenance of the building is really the driving factor for this request. We have roughly 24 maintenance packages to address a slew of different pieces of equipment: HVAC generators, technical support, boilers, hot water heaters, and I could go on. And those maintenance packages are between $500 per year and $10,000 per year. So this line has not been increased in 7 years. In the last 5 years, we've exceeded this budget in this line that we've been given. So my intent was, even though these maintenance packages creep up just a little bit each year, there's so many of them, that creep really adds up. So my intent was to increase that to $40,000 for this upcoming year. And then Ingrid can chime in if she would like, if there's any questions. I was asked by the finance department, not Ingrid specifically, but she's on the hot seat, the finance department, to include another $30,000. It's for an initiative, and maybe this was talked about already, I'm not sure, to make our payroll throughout the entire town more efficient. So the $30,000 is what's assessed for the police department. We have, aside from the Board of Education, the most employees, so the most payroll driven as far as labor intensive. So it will make our payroll more efficient, as well as the finance department downstairs more efficient. The deputy chief and I sat through a training. It seems like a really good program that's going to help us a lot. It's also going to help with audits and like I said, efficiency.
Chief,
So-
can I just interrupt to ask Ingrid a question?
Yeah.
Ingrid, I don't recall hearing about this from other department heads.
I have to look into this, but we are making a lot of, making more efficiencies on Munis, and this will be tied into Munis payroll. There's a lot of,
I guess what I mean is,
time that
30
we
30
spend.
grand is not a small amount of money, and I haven't heard any of the other department heads mention that their budget was affected by this initiative. That's what I'm getting at.
okay, I have to look more into
Okay.
it, right?
Thank you.
And related to that, I don't understand how the Munis reporting would be tied to building maintenance and repairs and supplies.
It's more on the human resource side, but I will take a look.
But
at
I would just think it would be a different line item than building maintenance, repairs, and supplies. Obviously, you have to come up with this money somehow.
Right.
But it just seems like, particularly since the actual for 21, 22 was 32,000, to jump up to 70, it seemed a little strange to me. But now at least I have an understanding of how you got to that number.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So moving on to the next line, equipment. This is a small request of $5,000. This is really driven by inflation. The line's only $10,000. So the percentage increase may look somewhat aggressive, but we're only talking $5,000 for 88 employees over an entire year. So I think it's minimal. Traffic maintenance and equipment. I know this comes up in the Board of Finance meetings from time to time, so I'd like to just spend a few minutes on this. This line covers the cost of repair, replacement, and additional signage throughout the town on public roads. As the Board of Police Commissioners approves signage, we have to buy the signs, the poles, we have to go out there and actually put them in. That's a small part of this $12,000 line that we've been working with for several years without an increase. However, the issue that we face every year is the town owns 18 traffic control signals. So all the traffic control signals that are either not on state roads or in front of fire departments, volunteer firehouses, we own. So we are in charge of maintaining them, repairing them, and replacing them. And as you can imagine, for obvious reasons, for safety reasons, if the traffic light goes out, we can't just ignore it and wait for the next fiscal year. So for example, this current fiscal year, we've already spent over $5,000 just on one intersection. Last fiscal year, we spent over $7,000 on just one intersection. And it could be anything from a car accident, and it's an evading in the middle of the night, the car takes off, and we're on the hook for that. Or just a lot of these traffic control signals are 30, 35 years old, and they're just breaking down. And there's another wrinkle to that, because they're so old, when we call to have them repaired, a lot of times there's no parts for these old traffic control signals. So we put Band-Aids on them, but Band-Aids still cost a lot of money, and they're always time sensitive. They're always on Christmas Eve or Sunday morning, and which drives up the cost. So not tonight, but at some point down the road, we'll probably have to have a conversation about some capital improvements for some of these older traffic control signals. The custodial contract, this is really just a place marker. This contract is going out to bid this year. Those bids, the competitive bids, have not been received yet. I don't believe they've gone out yet either, but from speaking with my counterparts in other municipalities with similar sized buildings, I anticipate an increase of $9,000 roughly to, and that's what drew me to request $42,000. I'd rather start the fiscal year not $9,000 behind, just starting out. So I anticipate that's how much it's going to cost for the custodial contract. Doctor's fees, I know this comes up from time to time in your meetings. There's two categories that feed the doctor's fees. The first is pre-employment onboarding of personnel. We hire somebody, we send them to polygraphs, psychological examinations, drug screening, stress tests, medical examinations, and they're very expensive. So when we onboard a lot of personnel, that drives that line up, obviously. The second category is driven by the police accountability law, which was a bill the first time we talked about it, which dictates that every police officer, now there's 56 police officers with our school resource officers included, we're in the mid-60s. Every police officer every 3 years has to be drug screened, and that costs $250 each screening. Every 5 years, a police officer has to go to a mental health and wellness evaluation. That's about $250 a piece also. So this really drove up the cost If you look at 2022, we were over $16,000. We were doing a lot of onboarding. So I think just raising it up to $10,000 moving forward, I think will be safe, and I think it's a responsible request.
So Chief, next year, will you be expecting any retirements that will require hiring new people and bringing on new people?
There's potential. We have a few eligible to retire. Nobody has submitted any papers or intent to retire, but the deputy and I talk every day about the potential, the 6-month outlook, the 1-year outlook. So there's potential for that.
There's possibility, but more than likely, the vast majority is going to be in the second category of doctor's fees. Got it.
Moving on to the PD CAD Next Gen software line. This covers a number of different software programs internally. This includes software licensing fees, maintenance packages, 24/7 response if there's a problem. As you can imagine, our communications center can't close down at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night because it's not convenient for somebody, so we need to pay for this. And this is a modest $1,500 increase for inflation. I should have skipped over that one. I apologize, Mr. Chairman, only $1,500. The next line is the regional assets, equipment maintenance. So this covers our 2 regional teams. We've talked about this before. It covers our regional SWAT team and our regional accident reconstruction team. There's 6 municipalities that pay into this, this endeavor. For the SWAT team and crash team, as we call it, I'm looking for just a $1,000 increase, and I wanted to touch on this just to highlight that between the 2 teams, there's well over $1 million in assets and equipment between vehicles, armored vehicles, excuse me, laser devices, night vision, over $1 million worth of assets. The vast majority, probably 95% of those assets were paid through grant funding through the region, which is steered through the state as federal dollars. So we contribute the 6 towns to this maintenance package because we need to keep this equipment up to speed, and we never know when that grant funding is going to run out. So that's what this modest increase is about. And that's all I have for page 26. Should I wait for questions or move on to 27?
Let's just pause, if you don't mind, and see if we have questions on the operating expenses before we go to capital.
I just had a quick question, Chief, if you could just clarify, because I think there was some confusion last year in the employment table, which is, I think, is page 42, as to how many patrolmen are included in the 23-24, as well, the current fiscal year, as well as how many you're requesting for next year.
It's going to be the same, 40 patrolmen.
So 40, okay. So last year, it went from 37 to 40, and the year before that, meaning 21-22, it went from 34 to 37.
Yes, in practical purposes. On paper, it was 1.5 patrolmen increase for that fiscal year because they started in January. So it went from 34 to 35.5.
Yeah, I just mean, sorry, from a budgetary standpoint.
3 each year. Yep.
3 each year.
34,
so
37 to 40.
In 2021, we had 34. In 21-22, went from 34 to 37. And then in 22-23, which is the current fiscal year, 37 to 40, and you're keeping it at 40 for next year.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Ingrid, if there's some way we could actually make sure that those numbers in the employment table are accurate, that would be really helpful.
Well, this is accurate, correct? It shows 40.
It is, yeah.
Absolutely, but
Right.
I think it's incorrect for last year, and it's incorrect for the year before that.
I think they generally only show the 2 numbers, Nancy, if there's an increase. These don't show the previous, they don't show the 23 typically,
no,
right?
I just
Yeah.
remembered this was a problem
Okay.
in the
All right.
budget packet, and I'm not sure if it was
Yeah.
ever fixed last
Okay.
year.
All right. Nancy, sorry, Diane?
The body camera data storage, how many years do we keep that?
We will probably keep it forever. just
Forever?
depending on the, oh, do you mean the actual data?
Yeah.
Yeah, how long do you keep the data, and how does that coincide with what, like, they're charging? There's got to be like a price point for, hey, X amount of storage is X,
Correct.
Y, Z, so that's.
So we pay for unlimited data.
It's unlimited,
So
okay.
we don't, yeah, so we pay for the most. There is by state statute, by the state of Connecticut Library, that dictates how long we have to retain that for,
So-
but we exceed that.
Okay. All right, that answers my question, because it's relative to how much you keep and store
Mhm.
going forward.
Chief, for certain line items, one being like training, for example, do you benchmark with other of your other towns as to what's an appropriate level of spend for the number of police officers that we have? Can you just talk to me about that a bit?
Sure, so we all talk. It's actually a good collaboration in the region, if not through the state, but especially the region. So we are CLIA accredited. There's only 30 agencies in the entire state who are. So our training standards are the highest there are in the state. Some municipalities choose to do all private training collaborations where they would pay instructors to come in. They'd have to fill their entire classroom up with personnel. So it's the cost associated with the instructor, and then the cost associated with the overtime to actually fill that room. What we do is a regional effort with a recertification training. So we pay to, which comes out of dues, the dues line. We pay South Central Criminal Justice Administration, and they fund for free, because we're associated with them, the recertification training. We also invest internally. We send our own training instructors to become, they call it train the trainer. So for example, a sergeant or a lieutenant was identified as having a lot of experience or knowledge in a certain field.
Yep.
We get them certified in that field. That gives them the ability to come in-house. Now they could provide that training for 1, 2, 3, 5 officers, not on overtime, on straight time, so it cuts down costs, not only in training, but overtime.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And then just a general comment on line items like electricity, oil and gas. Do we provide like guidance as a town to all the departments rather than have the various town departments budget those line items on their own? And do we look at like data as to where like electric rates are going and where oil and gas rates are going, so that we can have like a uniform approach?
I think that's very ideal, and that's what we are trying to implement.
Okay.
We are looking into that.
Because
That makes sense.
Because
Yes.
It makes sense,
it's odd that each
Yeah.
department head
Right.
is arbitrarily coming up with their budget
Yeah.
by like just thinking about it. I'm sure there's some data out there that can help us kind of dial in a better number. But I'm not criticizing the figures that you put forward, Chief.
If I could predict the gas and oil for next year, I'd be on CNN or Fox News, not sitting here in front of you. So
Yeah.
not offended at all, Justin.
Thank you.
All right, why don't we go on to capital, please?
Prior to capital, just real quick, page 27, animal control. This is pretty straightforward.
Oh,
Personnel
sorry. Yep.
full-time, there's
Sorry
wage
about that.
increases. They're in the clerical union. This is page 27. Their overtime mirrors those wage increases, and differential is the only other line that's increased in the animal control line on page 27. What that is again, contractual obligations. Currently, they're paid $25 per day per animal control officer to be on call. Yeah, it's going up to $35 per day, so that's just a minor increase, but it's contractual.
We have one animal control person?
We have two.
Two?
We do, yes.
Are we still sharing with, well, is Hamden still using part of our?
Yeah, we're still under that
Yeah.
MOU until
Mm.
at least June 30 of 2023.
Okay,
It's working out well
yeah.
for both towns.
I noticed when we were looking at the actuals, something about canine and something was, I noticed it went up.
It's the food. The food is up.
Is that the
Cost of
food?
is up.
So I know tonight's not about,
Yeah.
the current fiscal year budget, but I'll touch on
Yeah.
that, because I saw that.
Right.
I watch all your meetings, but they're not. So I saw that.
Why?
This year, unfortunately, I won't answer that here. This year, unfortunately, one of our German Shepherds had an emergency surgery. So that came out of that line.
Oh,
It cost
okay.
$6,200 or in that
Yep,
ballpark.
I remember that.
So it's
now
not
that you
just
say that.
the food aspect, it's
It's
maintaining the
the
actual.
health, okay,
yeah,
yep,
Maintenance.
you're right.
Right.
So obviously, we can't predict that or budget for that.
No, you
That's
can't,
why.
no, and I remember seeing that, so, okay, thank you.
Capital, page 38, capital, I'll start with 3 marked police cruisers at the cost of $120,000 or $40,000 each. This is state contract pricing. 1 unmarked police vehicle, this is less expensive, so this is $45,000 for the car, but that includes the upfit, not just the car, but the car and the upfit.
Chief, excuse me, a lot of the departments are having trouble actually getting equipment. Can you actually get the police cars?
We could,
Okay,
yeah, we have a secret.
okay.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate, and
All right.
It's been working out well for us. And we share our secrets with other department heads, but I
Just
can't
not the
speak
Board of
for them.
Finance.
And your plan going forward is to do 3-4, 3-4 alternating for
It was
police
always
cars?
3, wasn't it?
Well, if you look in the 5-year plan, it looks like it's 3, 4, 3. For
But
many
it's-
years, it was 2
yeah.
per year, and then it went up to 3.
Oh, we always did 3,
And now
didn't
it looks like it's 3, 4.
So I could
3,
touch
4.
on that. We're not at the 5-year capital plan, but since you brought it up. So when you say we used to request 2, that was, that predates a
Yeah.
lot of us. That's when we had 46, 48 police officers. Now we have 56, so there's more police officers. So we've been asking for 3 or 4 each year. If you look at that 5-year capital plan, asking for 3 marked cruisers and 1 unmarked vehicle. And then the following year, 4 marked vehicles. So 4 overall each year, just shrinking that marked vehicle every other year to allow for the unmarked vehicle purchase. So the next bullet in capital is police body armor. Body armor is only good for 5 years. It expires. We're not going to have police officers walking around. As you can imagine, I wouldn't expect anybody to be comfortable with that once that body armor expires. So in a perfect world, this would be just 1/5 of the department every year, but it just doesn't work out like that. When there's new hires, different purchases happen. So next fiscal year, we need 15. This is on state contract pricing, and that will come in at $12,000 for that purchase.
Chief, I'm sorry, Chief, just
Sure.
a quick question about the, going back to the vehicles. I think I asked you this last year. What's the size of your current fleet in terms of vehicles that you actually use on a daily basis? Meaning the police vehicles, and then how many unmarked vehicles do you have?
Deputy Chief made sure I was prepared this year, so.
Excellent.
to thank him
Great
for
job.
that. Just let me dig in and find this information for you.
There's 36 total.
There we go, see? See?
Well done.
There are 36 total, 16 marked cars. 16 marked cars in our patrol division. There's 4 marked cars that we use for road jobs. There's 6 detective vehicles. There's some admin cars. There's 2 animal control vans. There's a traffic maintenance van, and there's a few traffic vehicles that we use or purchased through grant funding. So 36 total, 16 marked in patrol.
Got it. And what kind of criteria do you use for determining which ones you're going to be replacing? Is it, number of miles, the age of the vehicle, and likewise for the unmarked?
A number of different things. So I'll talk specifically about patrol, the marked vehicles first, because those are the vehicles that are responding emergency lights and sirens the most often. So safety is our priority. My number 1 priority is officer safety and wellness. So it's a combination of miles. You also have to take into consideration hours on the engine. And in these vehicles that we purchase, just like all of our vehicles, there's no odometer or trigger to track those hours on the engine. So for example, in a 1 8-hour shift, if you drive constantly, you may put 120 miles on that vehicle. But if you drive 40 miles, but for whatever reason you're idling for 6 hours, it's still wear and tear. It's wear and tear on different components of the vehicle. So mileage, hours of operation or idling, the years of service, the track record of maintenance on the vehicle and repairs on the vehicle. So, for example, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago now, we were authorized to purchase 3 vehicles. We chose to purchase Dodge Chargers. All 3 of those Dodge Chargers repeatedly had issues with transmissions and front end. So we were spending a lot of money to repair those vehicles out of warranty. So we got rid of those and trade-in earlier than we would have if they were a vehicle that was running smoothly. So it's a number of different components that comes into play.
Great. Thank you for clarifying. It's helpful.
I didn't even have to find the vehicle information. That worked out well. So the next bullet is emergency lights and sirens, and I think this line is misleading. I'll work with Mr. Monaco to change this for next year. It's not just lights and sirens package that we're putting into these vehicles. Maybe 25, 30 years ago it was, but it's a complete upfit of these vehicles, and it's very impressive when you sit in one of these cars to see how much technology, how much equipment, and it's impressive the cost of this equipment and installation. And also tying all the software and the components together. So it costs about $30,000 per vehicle. So the emergency lights and sirens package, which is really the upfit of the marked vehicles, not the unmarked vehicles, is $90,000 total, $30,000 each. Moving on to the next bullet, firearms. Currently, I'm seeking to purchase 65 new firearms to replace our current firearms that we have. That's not going to replace everyone's firearms, but the majority of the folks that you see in uniform driving those marked police vehicles every day, not admin firearms. They are going to be 8 years old by the time we replace them, which will be, if approved, which will be in calendar year 2024, towards the end of fiscal year 2024. So 8 years old, that is the end of the life expectancy of a law enforcement firearm. They're not used for target practice or home defense, as you can imagine. They're out in the elements, the rain, the snow, everything. They're taken in and out of leather holsters and plastic holsters. They're being banged against car doors. These officers are wrestling with people and running through woods. So I hope that everyone would support not only the safety of the officers by supporting this, but also the safety of our community. That's the last piece of equipment that we want to fail in any situation.
Chief, are you saying with the same model sidearm, or are you changing the sidearm model?
The same, it's a new generation, but it's going to be exactly the same as far as the caliber, 9mm. It's going to be the same feel, it's just going to be a brand new gun. And because our armors do a great job with maintaining our current firearms, we're going to get a good amount of trade-in value on our current firearms.
Are the firearms routinely tested?
They are.
They are.
Yeah.
So just to make sure that everybody's safe.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Great news.
And finally, last but not least, the last bullet is portable radios. And this is another adjustment, like the first line, I asked for an adjustment to include the dispatchers. This adjustment is only because I didn't receive the official quote until after my budget needed to be submitted. We need 5 portable radios for our officers. I requested $15,000. The number came in at just under $22,000, so I'm asking to make that adjustment. Again, Motorola wasn't able to get me that official quote until a month ago. With the addition of new officers, we need to make these purchases. These radios are really computers, so you can see how expensive they are. So every so often, Norcom, which is our vendor through Motorola, comes in. They do software updates on our radios. They do tests and calibrations. They do updates on different frequencies with our surrounding towns to make sure that through mutual aid, we're able to communicate properly with everyone. But also, they break. Like I said, we have officers out there fighting with people, chasing after people, and just in and out of buildings and cars and inclement weather, they break. So we need to be able to give spare radios to these officers. They have to have a radio every shift, every day. So when they're being repaired or updated and maintained, we need these radios to give the officers. And that's all I have for the presentation.
Thank you, Chief. Members? Mr. Hallahan?
Well, everything in your budget makes sense, and thank you very much for your clear presentation. The bottom line figure, of course, is listed here as an 11% increase in your prior $7 million budget, now going $8 million. And we want to give you the resources you need, obviously, to fulfill your mission and all your objectives and everything that makes you so critical to the town. So the obvious generic question I have to ask you is, if this 11 or even 12% increase, if that additional dispatcher is added, if that is excessive for acceptance by the people of this town, what on your list would be the easiest to reduce or change?
Sure. So first, I'd like to start with just pointing out what I think is the obvious, but for either people watching at home or anybody who doesn't have a budget in front of us, the full-time personnel line is by far, I don't have the percentage, over 90% of the overall budget, right? So over $5.8 million. With the dispatcher increase, maybe $5.9 million compared to a $8 million budget, right? So certainly not 90%.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the budget. So 5 years worth of wage increases has really driven this. And if that contract was signed, and which is no fault to anybody, this would not be an 11% overall increase, it would be a 2 or 3%.
That's good.
But I'll move on to answer your
No,
question.
that's an important translation that the first selectman has to communicate at the town meeting. Because these booklets are gonna be handed out, and obviously that labor line is gonna be very close to what we're seeing tonight. And that's something that has to be explained, and this is why I made that request just a couple weeks ago to the finance department for an understanding of all the contractual statuses of all the unions in town, so that we have to be able to translate, and the first selectman has to be able to communicate how many years in arrears what is reflective of the labor law. It reflects how many years of unsettled contracts. So, yeah, I know you're talking about 5 years. That might be just 4 increments, or it might be 5 increments. We're not sure. It depends on the dates that you send us in the material that I've requested. But that's critical to how we're going to go and accept or not accept each department's budget, and how it's explained to the town. So it's very important. Thank you for pointing out the obvious. Yeah, because the grade A patrolman line on our personnel page there on 42, is an increase of 13%. Now that's either 2.25% for 5 years, or it's closer to 2.5% for 4 years. So we'll get that explanation. And all the other line items on there are contractually obligated. Is that correct? Because those figures come from the finance department usually.
Yes.
Yeah. Usually you generate them and send them to him. That's right?
Yes, we're the one that puts those figures in.
Yeah. So there's no steps, or there's no other changes in labor expenses that are not related to contracts on these on page 42 for the police. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's important to understand as a default, as a basis for us knowing that there's discretionary and there's non-discretionary. And if you're keeping the same amount of personnel, whatever our labor attorneys, or whatever the contracts say, we are either going to fund or ask for a reduction in personnel. So that's very obvious. And we're not asking for a reduction in personnel. Let's get that straight now. So that's my opening question. My opening question to you was, is there anything in your budget that could be reduced? And since you're presenting your budget, you probably would say not without risking inadequate resources or training.
That's a great answer.
That's what the deputy would have said.
Thank you, Mike. Do any of the other members have questions for the chief?
No, I work with these guys every day. I have no questions for them, so. Okay.
I have 2 quick questions, again, related to that same employment table. The one secretary salary has gone up by 18.6%.
Yeah,
And so that is part of the secretarial pool, collective bargaining agreement.
Clerical pool, I would
Clerical.
say. It's a wage increase as well as a step increase.
So 18.6% is the combination of the two, because that seemed like.
So 3 years worth of wage increases, but also in timing-wise, also a step increase.
Step increase as well. And then there's a maintenance man 2 or traffic position that looks like it's been decreased by about
He
$4,000.
recently retired, so when we onboard a
Replaced.
new person, they would start at a lower step.
That's what I assumed, but I just wanted to make sure that this person wasn't reduced. And Chief, if you could just explain to me again, according to the page 42 employment table, it looks like we have 4 dispatchers, and I think you had mentioned 8. Is that right?
Nope, we see clerk, dispatchers, in parentheses, 8.
You're looking at the part-time.
I see. So that's different from dispatcher part-time.
Part-time, we have 4 that supplement that, and that's the second line in the overall budget on page 26. There's $80,000 that's budgeted for part-time supplemental help.
Okay, and that's specifically for supplementing the 8 dispatchers?
Yeah, so the goal is during days and evenings hours, when the communication center is the busiest, that we ideally have a 3rd dispatcher in the center. And
Right.
that's, we negotiate with the union to allow part-time personnel to bring us up to that staffing level.
So I guess that's what I don't understand, is if you have 8 to choose from to cover day and evening, and then for the 12 to 8 shift, you're claiming you only have 2 for half the time and 1 for half the time. Why is it that the 4 people couldn't cover
We
the
need to give
2?
them days off as well.
I see.
So there's currently 2 scheduled for days, 2 scheduled for evenings, 2 scheduled for a rotation, which sometimes is days, sometimes it's evenings, and then 2 scheduled for midnights. That makes up our 8. So when the 2 day shift people are off, on their days off, that flop schedule covers them. When the 2 dispatchers on evenings are off, that flop schedule covers them. But when the people are off on midnights, there's nobody there to cover. That's why we need that 9th person.
I see. And the 4 supplementals can't cover that
They
ninth
could, and they
position.
are right now. If you reference the year-to-date budget, I'm sure you'll have either in front of you or close to you. You look at that second line, that's funded with $80,000.
Right.
We've only used 5% of that so far. So they are actually working overtime to backfill. We're so short in dispatch. They're working overtime. So their funding is coming out of the overtime line instead of that part-time personnel. I know if you don't work in the communications center, it's hard to wrap your head around. But they're working shifts. Ideally, we have the full-time dispatchers working shifts, so there's a minimum of 2 of them at all times. And that part-time personnel is only supplementing to fill that 3rd seat in our communications center. Unfortunately, right now, we're so short-staffed in dispatch that they are working actual full-time spots, even though they're part-time personnel.
And they're paid from the overtime line, or as
They
they're
are.
paid from this part-time 80,000?
It depends what shift they pick up. So currently, the shifts they're picking up is coming out of the overtime line because it's protecting overtime. It's an overtime shift by union rules.
I see.
And anybody, this isn't just for you, anybody wants to stop by and get a tour of the communication center, I think it's a lot easier when you see it. You look at the schedule on the wall and you see the seats and what they actually do,
Right.
opposed to just saying 2, 2, 2.
Yeah, no,
1,
it
4,
is
8.
hard to kind of wrap my brain around, particularly when you have 12 people that we're talking about to cover what sounds like 3 shifts. Yeah.
So for part-time personnel, for
For-
a number of different reasons, they're limited with their hours they can work. Because the 8 full-timers are union and the 4 part-timers are not, we can't integrate them as far as a rotation schedule. So ideally, for most of this current fiscal year, we've had 4 full-time dispatchers, but funded for 8. So there's been so many open shifts. We've relied on the part-time personnel to really help the full-timers answer the phone.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
Does anyone else?
Now, my question was, what you just said, is there ever a chance like that 3rd shift, that you have like 1 person or?
Half the shifts.
So what happens if there's multiple things going on at the same time?
It's not ideal, and that's why we want that other. So on the police side, so our communication center dispatches for police, fire, EMS. On the police side, as long as 911 gets answered and we're dispatched, really, in a crisis, we don't need to be dispatched because of the technology we have with our cars and the communication that we've implemented. The police are fine. EMS and fire, if there's a lot going on because we changed to this EMD that you're all aware of, and that's why we got to 8 dispatchers where they have to stay on the phone and ask a series of questions through a script. They're locked onto that phone. So it's a liability in those overnight hours when there's 1 dispatcher. In a crisis, we have a police officer who's in the building, a supervisor, go into the communication center, drop the police business and try to help out. But it's not ideal.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. All right, thank you.
So we're always going to answer 911 calls, but we want to do it the most efficient way possible for everyone's safety.
Michael?
But, just as a matter of housekeeping, since that building supply line became very confused with software,
The payroll program?
Yeah. Yeah, can that line be split up? Can we throw that into a different line? Just consider,
yes.
okay, consider that, because having it under building supplies is too misleading.
We could do that.
Just out of a personal note, you're in charge of many of the traffic signals in town, well, at least the 18 we own. I don't know about the ones on state roads. I'm specifically talking about the one on Maple that intersects Layton and Poole.
We own that one.
You own that one. I've been asking for years if the vehicle sensor on Poole Road would be fixed, so that it's not a strict timer, but on an as-needed basis.
Who have you been asking?
Mostly people in your position.
Okay. Well, I'll take that up with the Board of Police Commissioners at our next meeting.
Yeah. Just don't even look at it, because it doesn't make sense to me. And then lastly, for the gentleman who's no longer with us, he always asks about the dog. Is it one dog or two?
We currently have 2 dogs.
Two dogs. And, he's always asking what they're up to. So in general, do the dogs continue to be worth every dollar in expenses related to them?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
Because we remember when we
much
had-
more than what the town is paying. They're a force multiplier, they're a public relations tool that really allows us to bridge a lot of gaps with people. who
Sometimes
otherwise wouldn't be
other
able to.
towns utilize
Sure.
what we have. Yeah. Okay, I just had to do that.
Bless you.
He asks every year.
Thank you, Mike.
That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the job you do. You make us proud. No pressure, just perfectly good.
All right, thanks, everyone.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.